She'll get nothing, Dad hated her. The words sliced through the stale air the moment I stepped into the room. No one looked up. No one even flinched. They just let it hang there, loud and deliberate like a knife dropped on marble. Brittany's voice, cold-clipped and unmistakably pleased with itself, echoed through the high ceiling of the conference room, landing hard in my chest. I hadn't even let go of Noah's hand yet. He squeezed back instinctively, his fingers small but firm. I glanced down at him, his dark brown eyes wide and alert, searched mine for a reaction. I gave him the best version of a smile I could manage. Thin, brittle. The kind that's made to survive a storm, not stop it. The scent of leather chairs and stale coffee mixed with something sweeter, Brittany's signature perfume, all white lilies and ice. She was already seated at the head of the table, dressed in her usual precision charcoal pantsuit. Pearl earrings, hair in that taut blonde bun that screamed control. Beside her, her husband Nathan leaned back like he owned the place. One arm draped over the back of her chair, nodding as if to say, "That's right, we said it. And what are you going to do about it?" I didn't answer them. I just walked further into the room with Noah and took the chair farthest from the head, by instinct, not invitation. The silence was louder than any insult. No one said hello, not Uncle Dean, not Aunt Marla, not any of the cousins I used to share backyard Thanksgivings with. Eyes followed us. Yes, but not out of kindness or curiosity, more like calculation. I adjusted the hem of my black dress, the same one I wore to Mom's funeral 5 years ago, and sat. The chair creaked under me like it didn't want to hold the weight of everything I carried with me. Noah slid into the seat beside me, his legs too short to touch the ground, his small hands folded neatly in his lap, like we were in church. I could feel the stares boring into the back of my neck. Let them. I wasn't supposed to come. That's what Brittany and the rest of them had hoped for. No doubt they'd already started dividing the estate in their heads, counting furniture, imagining square footage, mentally swapping out kitchen cabinets. I wasn't a person to them. I was a ghost they thought they'd exorcised 8 years ago. But Noah had asked me to come. He'd found the letter from the lawyer delivered without a card, just a date and a time folded on the kitchen counter. He asked, "What is this, Mom?" And when I told him, brushing it off with a shrug and some half-hearted mutter about family business I don't need to be part of, he looked at me and said, "Maybe there's something you need to hear." I don't know how a 10-year-old learns to speak like that. I had stared at the envelope for an entire day. I told myself it was probably a mistake, or worse, some cruel game Brittany orchestrated just to watch me squirm in a room full of people who never forgave me for walking away. But Noah's quiet confidence had cracked something in me. He never pushed, he never begged. He just said it once, and it stayed with me. So here we were, sitting in a room where I used to be a daughter and a sister, now relegated to a stranger with the wrong last name. I could hear the click of someone's watch, a cough from the far end of the table, the heavy scrape of Uncle Dean's loafer against the wood floor. Still no one said a word. I leaned over and whispered to Noah, "You okay?" He nodded. "Are you?" His question caught me off guard. I should have lied. I should have said yes, but my throat was too tight to answer. The door opened with a soft creak. Mr. Hale stepped inside, the family lawyer still wearing his navy suit that hung too long in the sleeves. He held a folder, thick with papers, his expression unreadable. As a mashum, as always, I remembered him from when I was 16, sitting in that same office after Mom died, telling us what she left behind. He hadn't aged much, but maybe that was just the lighting. "Thank you all for coming," he said, adjusting his glasses. "We'll begin shortly." The room straightened like a spine. Brittany uncrossed and recrossed her legs. Uncle Dean leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Aunt Marla smiled tightly, the way people do when they think a camera might be watching. I felt Noah's hand reach for mine again under the table. I held it, grateful for something warm. Mr. Hale cleared his throat. "As executor of Franklin Morgan's estate, I'm here to read his final will and testament signed and notarized 8 weeks before his passing. If there are no objections, I'll proceed." No one spoke, not because they didn't have objections, but because they thought they had already won. I could almost hear Brittany rehearsing the contents in her head. She likely knew it by heart. Of course she did. She was the one who stayed, the one who visited hospitals, sat through treatments, managed medications. Not because she loved him, but because she loved control. I had left, I had taken my son and walked away from a marriage that was cracking me in half, and a family that called me a failure for doing so. No one asked why I stopped showing up to Christmas. No one asked what it felt like when my father turned his back the day I showed up with Noah in one arm and a suitcase in the other. He never opened the door, and they all pretended it never happened. They said I was dramatic, rebellious, a coward, but I had survived. Quietly, fiercely, I had built a life for Noah and me with nothing but part-time jobs and late-night prayers. And now, I was sitting in this room, breathing the same air as them, again reminded why I left in the first place. I was tired of defending myself to people who never listened. Mr. Hale opened the folder. The rustle of paper was somehow louder than Brittany's earlier insult. My heart thudded in my ears. Noah leaned against me slightly, like he could feel the tremor in my body. I told myself I was ready for this, but I wasn't. And still I stay, because this time I wasn't alone. I had Noah. And maybe, just maybe, there was something I needed to hear. Everyone's name was called except mine. I sat still back, straight hands folded in my lap as Mr. Hale began reading the will. His voice was steady and clear, like someone who had done this 100 times. But I could feel a quiet shaking in my chest, like something about to break free. "The primary residence at Ridgewood Lane shall be passed to Brittany Morgan," he began, not even glancing in my direction. Brittany lifted her chin, the corners of her lips twitching into a proud smile. She was dressed to receive praise, elegant, composed, triumphant. She didn't look at me, but I could feel her victory in the air. "To Mr. Dean Morgan, the full controlling interest in Morgan Automotive and all company assets," Mr. Hale continued. Uncle Dean nodded as though this had already been discussed. His eyes moved briefly across the room before settling back into a smug half-smile, like the king of a small petty kingdom. "The vintage automobile collection will be transferred to Paul Morgan," he added. Paul, the cousin who once locked me outside during a snowstorm just to be cruel, laughed quietly to himself. Of course, even he got something. I was barely breathing by the time Mr. Hale reached the final section. And finally, he said, flipping to the last page of the document, as previously declared, and filed, "My daughter, Claire Morgan, shall receive nothing from this estate." The sentence landed like a blade, swift and deliberate, not a hesitation, not a trace of remorse. Brittany let out a small chuckle. Uncle Dean shook his head, as if to say, well, what did she expect? Noah, sitting beside me, reached for my hand under the table. His grip was soft but steady, grounding me in a moment where everything else seemed to dissolve. I stared at the grain of the polished wood table, trying to pretend I hadn't heard it. But my ears burned, my throat tightened. I had come here with no expectations, and somehow I was still blindsided. Mr. Hale closed the folder. That was it. My father had written me out like I'd never existed. I could feel the eyes around the room. Some were satisfied, some were simply indifferent. None of them surprised. I pushed my chair back slightly. I needed to leave. I needed air. I needed to be anywhere but here. But then Noah leaned closer and whispered, "You forgot the video he recorded." The words stopped me cold. I looked at him confused. "What did you say?" Noah reached into his backpack without another word. From a zippered compartment, he pulled out a small envelope, slightly wrinkled but sealed tight. On the front, in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For the lawyer. Only if it gets ugly." My heart skipped. He handed it across the table to Mr. Hale, who took it carefully. His brows drew together as he studied the handwriting. He looked up at me, then at Noah, then back at the envelope. "This is Franklin's," he said quietly. He opened it slowly, deliberately, like something sacred might be inside. A USB drive. And a handwritten letter folded once with Franklin Morgan's signature clearly visible at the bottom. Mr. Hale read the note silently to himself. Then he looked up, his face suddenly less composed than before. "This changes everything," he said. And his voice was no longer just procedural. A thick silence dropped over the room. Brittany shifted in her seat. Uncle Dean narrowed his eyes. Even Paul looked up from admiring his imaginary car keys. "What is that?" Brittany asked sharply. "That can't be legal." "It's been notarized," Mr. Hale replied. "It was included with a prior draft of the will and was to be held in confidence unless the situation turned hostile." Hostile, Dean barked. "How the hell is this hostile?" Mr. Hale ignored him and plugged the USB into a small laptop resting near his briefcase. The screen lit up, flickered, then turned black. A single word appeared in white letters: play. No one moved, no one spoke. Mr. Hale hit the spacebar. The screen glowed, and there he was. Franklin Morgan, my father. Older, thinner, wearing the navy sweater I'd given him years ago for his birthday. The one I wasn't sure he'd ever actually worn. He sat at his desk, the one from our childhood home, with the globe behind him and a small brass lamp casting a soft glow across his weathered features. He looked directly into the camera. "Claire," he said, "if you're watching this, then things probably didn't go well." I gripped the arms of my chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I didn't expect peace to come from my will," he continued, "and I know how it looks. I know what I said to you. I know what I didn't say." His voice cracked. "I believed what Brittany told me. I believed what Dean whispered behind closed doors. I believed that you left because you didn't care. But I never asked why, and for that, I am sorry." I closed my eyes, tears pressing forward without permission. "I shut the door on you and my grandson when you came to me for help. I thought you were weak. But I was the coward." He paused. "You walked away to protect your son. You built a life without my support, my money, or anyone in this room. And for that, Claire, you have more strength than anyone here combined." I opened my eyes. Noah was staring at the screen, calm, proud. My father continued. "So I changed the will, not out of guilt, but because it's the only thing left I can do, right?" The screen went quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward slightly and said, "To Claire Morgan and Noah James Morgan, I leave the house on Ridgewood Lane, my savings accounts, and the remainder of my retirement fund. I've also set up a trust for Noah's college." Gasps broke out around the room. Brittany stood up suddenly, her chair screeching. "This is ridiculous. He must have been manipulated." "Sit down," Mr. Hale said more firmly than anyone expected. My father's voice returned. "Let them be angry. Let them say what they will. Claire, you earned this. Not because you're perfect, but because you showed up when it mattered most. You stayed true when it would have been easier to vanish." The screen flickered once more, "and then I'm proud of you. I always have been. I just didn't say it soon enough." And then the video ended. The room was silent. No one moved. Brittany's lips trembled. Her face drained of color. Dean stood slowly, muttering something under his breath. Paul didn't say a word. Mr. Hale closed the laptop and said gently, "We'll proceed with the amended instructions." I turned to look at Noah. His hand found mine again, warm, steady, and strong. I bent down and kissed the top of his head. "Thank you," I whispered. He smiled up at me. "I just wanted you to hear him." I nodded, my heart full of something that felt like both release and rebirth. We hadn't come for the money. We came for the truth. And somehow, in the smallest envelope held by the smallest hands, we had found it. The room fell silent, not from respect, but from fear of what was coming. Everyone stared at the small USB drive in Mr. Hale's hand like it was a live grenade. Even Brittany, who had been gloating just seconds earlier, shifted in her seat. Her smirk faltered. The confident tilt of her chin wavered. Mr. Hale examined the envelope that Noah had handed him. With quiet reverence, the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. My father's bold, all caps, slightly tilted to the right. Beneath my name was a line scrawled in black ink, "For the lawyer only if it gets ugly." And it had gotten ugly. Mr. Hale cleared his throat and looked around the table. "I recognize this handwriting," he said, voice firm. "And this envelope was sealed with the testator's private stamp. The signature on this accompanying note also matches Franklin's authenticated records." Brittany scoffed. "Oh, please." "Dad never recorded anything. That's fake." But her voice lacked conviction now, and no one backed her up. Even Uncle Dean remained silent, the smugness drained from his face. I felt my hands trembling slightly. I pressed them down against my lap, trying to steady myself, but my heart was pounding too loudly to ignore. Next to me, Noah sat quietly, his expression calm. Far too calm for a 10-year-old. I reached for his hand again, and he gave it to me willingly, his small fingers threading between mine. It was his bravery that had brought this moment here, not mine. Without a word, Mr. Hale inserted the USB drive into his laptop. The screen blinked, then flickered to light. There he was. My father, Franklin Morgan, older, tired, wearing the navy sweater I bought him for his last birthday. The one I wasn't even sure he'd kept. He sat behind his old oak desk, hands folded, lips pressed into a thin line. For a second, he just looked at the camera. Then he spoke. "Hi, Claire." My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't heard his voice in almost a decade. But here it was, so familiar, yet different, softer, slower. "If you're watching this," he continued, "then I failed you. Again." The room was still, even. Brittany had stopped tapping her foot under the table. The cousins who had whispered behind their hands earlier were staring, stunned. "I imagine things didn't go smoothly," my father said with a bitter chuckle. "That's why you're seeing this. I told Hale to play it only if things turned tense." He exhaled deeply. "I made mistakes, not small ones, big, unforgivable ones. And I carried them like trophies for years, thinking I was doing the right thing. That I was protecting this family's name, the business, the image. But in doing so, I erased you." I felt my throat tighten, my eyes stung. I listened to the wrong people. I believed what Brittany told me, what Dean whispered, that you were selfish, that you were weak, that you were running away. He paused, looked down. When he lifted his eyes again, they were wet. "But the truth is, you were the strongest of us all." The tears I'd been holding back slid silently down my cheek. "You left a man who broke you. You protected your son when no one else would. You did what I didn't have the courage to do. When I saw my own wife falling apart years ago." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't walk away from the family, Claire. The family walked away from you." Across the room, I heard a soft gasp. Maybe it was from one of the cousins, maybe Brittany. I didn't care. In the weeks before I died, I had time to think. Time to look back, and I realized I didn't want to go without making it right. Not perfectly, I know. I can't undo the pain. I can't reclaim the years. But I can at least acknowledge the truth. My father leaned forward in the video, his voice thick with emotion. So I changed my will. Gasps broke out. Brittany straightened, mouth-opening eyes flashing. Franklin continued, without flinching. "I left the house to you and Noah. The savings, the retirement account, I created a college fund in your son's name. Because that boy, he reminded me of everything I lost." I looked down at Noah, who was still watching the screen with solemn understanding, far beyond his years. "If they're angry," Franklin said, "let them be. You earned your peace, Claire, and they don't get to take that from you anymore." Silence fell again. "I'm proud of you," he added quietly. "I always was. I just didn't know how to show it." The screen went black. No music, no fade out. Just the abrupt final silence of a man who had spent his last words trying to heal something he had once broken. Brittany shot up from her chair. "This is a scam. That video could be edited, fabricated." He was old, confused. "This means nothing." But Mr. Hale didn't flinch. He reached into his briefcase and produced a folder. Inside were notarized papers dated signed and verified. He lifted the final document. "This is the amended will," he announced. "Filed 7 days before Mr. Morgan's passing. Witnessed and sealed and officially recorded." He placed it on the table. Brittany looked like she might faint. Dean's face was pale, lips pressed into a tight line. No one said a word. And then, the last echo of my father's voice seemed to linger in the room. "I'm proud of you, Claire. I always was." I didn't say anything. But inside me, something shifted. Something heavy, long buried, finally let go. I looked around the table, at the faces of those who had called me unworthy, who had erased me, dismissed me, laughed when the will said I was getting nothing. Now they sat stunned, silent, angry. And I didn't care. Not anymore. The room didn't explode. It imploded one ego at a time. After the video ended, no one dared to speak. The air hung thick, tense, and awkward, as if even sound was afraid to move. For the first time in years, Claire didn't feel like the smallest person in the room. She felt like the most human. Brittany was the first to break. She shoved her chair back so hard it screeched across the hardwood floor, sharp as a scream. Her face had drained of color, her lips pressed into a bitter line. As she stormed out, her heels tapping rapid fire like gunshots. Her husband trailed behind her, red-faced, avoiding everyone's eyes, mumbling something no one cared enough to hear. Uncle Dean stood slowly, clearly searching for words, maybe a defense, maybe a dismissal. But Mr. Hale was already walking toward him, calm and unbothered. Without a word, the attorney handed Dean a printed copy of the final will and nodded at the official seal in the corner. Dean's mouth opened, then closed again. He took the paper with a defeated hand and sank back into his seat. The fight left him like air from a balloon. The others, cousins, second cousins, old friends of the family, sat stiff and unsure. Their glances skittered like marbles on a polished floor, never quite meeting Claire's eyes. The people who had once turned away from her with calculated coldness now didn't seem to know where to look. Some fiddled with their phones, others coughed into their hands. No one dared speak first. Claire sat still, her hands folded gently in her lap. She didn't gloat, she didn't smirk. There was no triumph on her face, only a quiet unraveling, like a pressure valve finally releasing steam after years of strain. Her chest didn't feel tight anymore. The shame that had once sat heavy in her bones had evaporated. Not because anyone had apologized, because someone had finally seen her. Noah leaned against her, his small hand finding hers again. His grip wasn't tight this time. It was calm, solid. When Claire looked down, she found him smiling, not wide, not loud, but a kind of smile that came from understanding something important. That what they had built, the peace, the love, the resilience had never been worthless. It had always been something sacred. A quiet shuffling broke the silence. One of Claire's aunts, her mother's sister, a woman who had once crossed the street to avoid her, stepped hesitantly toward her. She didn't say much. Just a soft, "I'm sorry, I didn't know. I believed what they told me." Claire looked up, met her eyes, and offered a gentle nod. "It's okay," she whispered. But she didn't say more. She didn't need to. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't need an explanation. It just needs a boundary. She didn't expect anyone to fix the past. They couldn't. But in that moment, Claire realized something deeper. Her worth had never been for them to decide. Mr. Hale waited until the last of the guests filed out before approaching Claire. His steps were slow, deliberate. He looked tired but somehow lighter, like the video had closed a chapter for him too. "Your father may have spoken too late," he said, voice low and steady. But he made sure he wasn't silent forever. Claire nodded slowly, swallowing the lump rising in her throat, I think. That's the first time I've ever heard him say he was proud of me. Mr. Hale didn't respond right away. He just looked at her with something close to kindness. He should have said it sooner, he finally murmured. But maybe saying it at all matters more than we think. Claire turned to Noah, who was now quietly organizing the folders on the table, as if helping clean up a mess they didn't create. He gave us what we never had, she said more to herself than anyone else. A chance to start new. Outside, the sky had shifted. The clouds had pulled back just enough to let slants of golden light stretch across the pavement. Claire and Noah walked together to the car, neither speaking, just holding hands. Their fingers intertwined like threads that had always belonged together. They didn't take anything from the office that day. Not the legal papers, not the certificates, not the property files. Mr. Hale would mail them later. What Claire did take was small, barely the size of a thumb. The USB drive. She slipped it into the inside pocket of her coat, over her heart. Not because it had value on paper, but because it held a truth she had waited a lifetime to hear. Halfway through the drive home, Noah broke the silence. "Do you think he meant it?" he asked softly. Eyes still watching the trees blur past through the window. "When he said he was proud of you." Claire didn't answer right away. She thought of her father's face on the screen, older, softer, more human than she remembered. She thought of the cracks in his voice when he admitted his mistakes. She thought of how he'd said her name. Not with shame, not with bitterness, just with love. And then she smiled. "I do," she said finally, "and that's enough." Noah didn't say anything else. He just leaned his head against the car seat, content. At the next red light, Claire looked in the rearview mirror. The sky behind them was blooming into shades of orange and rose gold. It looked like the end of something, but not in a sad way. More like a curtain closing on an old play, one she'd performed in too long. This was a new beginning. When they pulled into their driveway, a modest brick house with a yard overgrown in wild daisies, Claire exhaled. Not just a breath, but something deeper. Something buried grief, maybe. Or the exhaustion of carrying a silence that didn't belong to her anymore. As Noah skipped ahead toward the front door, Claire lingered by the car, hand resting on the roof. Eyes on the horizon, she could still hear her father's last words echoing in her mind. "I'm proud of you, Claire. I always was. I just didn't know how to show it." She closed her eyes, let them settle inside her like roots, anchoring her to the earth. No more proving. No more pleasing, just being. That night after dinner, Claire didn't open the laptop. She didn't check emails or fold laundry. Instead, she sat beside her son on the couch, a worn quilt over both their laps, and they watched an old movie they'd seen a dozen times. Noah fell asleep before the credits rolled, head on her shoulder. Claire kissed the top of his hair, closed her eyes, and whispered, "You gave me back my voice." There was no applause, no fireworks, no family gathered around with newfound respect. Just a mother and her son wrapped in silence. But this silence finally meant something. It meant peace. It meant home. It meant she was whole. They never said sorry. Not Brittany, not Uncle Dean, not a single cousin who once laughed behind polite smiles and called me a ghost when I wasn't in the room. After the video, after the truth, they simply disappeared. One by one, like leaves falling from a tree that had been dead for a long time and didn't know it yet. I walked out of that will reading with no applause, no hugs, no redemption scene where the family suddenly got it. No, what I got was silence. But this time it wasn't crushing. It was clean. I didn't need them to say sorry. I didn't need Brittany to take it back, or Dean to admit he was wrong. I didn't need the people who once erased me to now write me in. Because something inside me had shifted the moment I heard my father's voice say, the one thing I never thought I'd hear, "I'm proud of you." That sentence did more than any apology could have. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath around my own name. The next morning I woke earlier than I had in weeks, and made breakfast while Noah slept in. The sun poured through the windows in soft bands of gold, and I let it warm my skin while I stood at the kitchen counter, coffee in one hand, silence in the other. No emails, no calls, just space. Space to think, space to finally feel what I had tucked away for so long. I thought I would feel vindicated, that I'd want to post something. Tell someone, share the truth. Maybe in a quiet Facebook post that would speak louder than anything Brittany ever said. But when I opened the app and saw her wedding photos still up, thousands of likes, glowing comments, I didn't feel the urge anymore. I didn't need to rewrite the narrative, because the people who matter already know the truth. That evening, I took out a sheet of cream-colored paper and wrote something by hand, something simple, direct, and final. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it because clarity deserves a full stop. I folded the paper, slipped it into an envelope, and drove across town with Noah in the passenger seat, holding it in his lap. He looked at me once during the drive and asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded. "I'm better than okay." We parked on the street outside my mother's house. The curtains were drawn and the porch light was off, even though the sun hadn't fully set. There were 3 other cars in the driveway. Brittany's, her husband's, and Dean's. I didn't ring the doorbell. I didn't want to see their faces or hear excuses that would only bruise the peace I had worked so hard to build. Instead, I walked up the porch, slipped the envelope under the door, and turned away without looking back. Inside that envelope, I'd written 8 words. "I'm not your scapegoat anymore. I'm done carrying this." That was it. No signature, no drama, just truth. Back in the car, Noah asked, "Will they read it?" "I hope they do," I said. "But it's not for them, it's for me." We drove home with the windows cracked, letting the wind carry out whatever bitterness might have remained. Later that night, Noah curled up beside me on the couch again. Head in my lap, feet tucked under the blanket, he was quiet, tracing circles on the fabric with his fingers. Then, without looking up, he asked, "Do you think Grandpa really loved us?" It was the kind of question children ask that rip your soul open with its honesty. I didn't rush to answer. I thought about all the years I had wondered that exact thing, about how silence can make you doubt your own memory, your own goodness, your own worth. But I had heard the truth now. "He did," I said finally. "He just didn't know how to show it." "But he tried at the end. He tried." Noah nodded. "I think that's what mattered." I leaned back, eyes misting. "Yeah," I whispered, "it really isn't." The next morning, I found the USB drive still in my coat pocket. I didn't want to put it away just yet. Not in a drawer, not in a box. It didn't feel like something to hide. It felt like a part of the record, a page of a story that had finally been told the right way. I placed it in a small ceramic dish on the windowsill where the morning light could touch it. Not as proof, but as peace. People will always rewrite you if you let them. They'll reduce you to one decision, one moment, one label. Difficult, selfish disappointment. They'll pass around versions of you that serve their comfort and call it truth. But truth has a funny way of surviving. Sometimes it's in a video you didn't know existed. Sometimes it's in the eyes of a 10-year-old boy who never doubted you. And sometimes it's in the quiet resolve to walk away from what hurt you without needing revenge. I never got the apology I once dreamed of, but I got something better. I got to live a life that no longer needed permission to be respected. And in the end, that's the kind of freedom that no inheritance, no mansion, no name on a will can ever give you. That's the kind of freedom you earn. That's the kind of freedom you keep. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with clarity. Claire didn't win money. She reclaimed her voice. Her father's final act wasn't about inheritance. It was about truth delivered too late, but still powerful enough to heal. This story reminds us, validation doesn't always come from others. It comes when we know our worth. No paper can erase who you truly are. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is walk away without bitterness, only peace. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt invisible or erased by the people who should have stood by you, know that you're not alone. Your voice matters, your truth matters, and one day it will be heard. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of quiet strength and justified redemption. Your journey deserves to be witnessed.